Yeah, you're looking good. Flesh
My
tones
dad's
and everything.
good degree was in civil engineering from Stanford. And
Oh, great.
he was a director of the Water Resources Center for the University of California.
Oh, fun.
And
Okay.
when he, when he finally retired, but he'd also done a lot of international work.
I don't have anything good for you to stick your thing on.
That's okay.
Okay, your arm's used to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he
Right.
does that.
Okay.
Muscles still work. I guess there's lots of things that I don't know to ask that you would know, so feel free to go off on whatever tangent. What I do have is a few questions that people have asked me to ask you, and from my own knowledge. First off, I taught an independent study school in California for a number of years, and I had 3 adults come in one day, and they say, we've failed the California water testing test 3 times. So we want to get hired, but we just can't wrap our minds around milliliters per gallon. So can you explain this metric stuff to us, as it's mixed up with gallons instead of liters? Because then we got to deal with parts per million, and what's it a parts per million of, a liter or a gallon? And we're flunking this test 3 times. Now, from state to state, my first question is from what I've asked other people that think they know but may not know, and you might know, does Utah use a test where the additives like fluoride or whatever they're putting in the water, as well as testing it for whatever, use milliliters per gallon, or is it milliliters per liter? And then when they measure parts per million, what's it a parts per million of, a gallon or a liter?
Okay, so in the United States, we've got this hodgepodge of stuff.
Okay.
And so we measure water in all kinds of weird ways. And if you've been dealing with water rights, they do their own things. And so we have acre feet, and we have gallons per minute, and we have cubic feet per second, and things like that. So generally speaking, with things in drinking water, we deal with parts per million.
Of?
So it's 1 part per million parts.
Of what,
so
a liter or a gallon?
It's liters.
Okay.
So it's not gallons. We don't mix, we don't like to mix.
Not like the Californians do.
Right? So 1 part per million is 1 milligram per liter of a substance.
Okay.
Whether that's fluoride, whether that's...
For the few months in the City newsletter, they did actually publish a chart. Okay, the next question is...
So let me add on to that.
Please do.
Sometimes we do parts per million. That's usually what it is. Sometimes it's parts per billion.
Got it.
And
we know a fellow who has an electronic sniffer. He designed this stuff to do parts per billion for
there's even
space programs.
One we're starting to get into, which is parts per trillion.
Interesting.
So, in any case, generally speaking, it's parts per million, which is milligrams per liter. We don't use gallons in that calculation.
Milligrams per liter. So it's as distinct from a milliliter per liter. It's milligram per liter.
And sometimes, depending on what it is, that's equivalent. So that's basically what it is.
Alrighty.
1 part per million, 1 substance, 1 million of water.
Okay, well that answers a lot of questions people have, like, what are we talking about here?
It's a mess, so that's generally what it is.
All right. In East Carbon City, see, the city government posts no organization chart. Nobody knows who the employees are. It's like, well, I think his first name is, kind of thing. So we understood that there's a fellow named Cody Valdez who is paid $89,000 a year as the head of maintenance, and there's a guy that works for him. And again, we're trying to find facts where people talk. We don't know the facts, but we think his name is Daniel, and we think from what we were told, he's failed this water testing test 3 times, and yet he's doing the testing somehow, some way. So that's all we know.
Or we've been told.
You must know who you work with or connect with over there.
Who doesn't?
So Cody Valdez is the Public Works Director,
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's certified. He's over Public Works, which includes Water Department, parks and whatever else.
Yeah, we understand that he was competent and knows how to do the test, but it got delegated and has been delegated for some time.
He has an employee, Bert Kraus.
Bert Kraus, okay.
B-E-R-T or U-R-T?
B-E-R-T.
Okay.
He's certified. And we have several
Certified by?
By the state.
Okay.
The Division of Drinking Water.
Okay.
So we have two types of certification. One is for water treatment, and one is for operating, managing the water system.
Okay.
And you guys can look up on the internet and find people who are certified.
Great.
Pink.
An old acquaintance.
He's certified. So this.
Whenever one asks the mayor, he says, "Oh, we have experts. What experts?" And we get this blank look, you know.
Daniel David, this other employee, I don't know.
Okay.
It's Daniel David?
We're not sure.
So if there's another employee, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, but to your knowledge, one person does the testing, and it's this Bert fellow.
So we require a system to have at least one certified operator, and depending on the complexity of the system. So take Wellington, for example. They don't treat any water, so they don't need anybody certified in water treatment. They need somebody certified in water distribution.
Yeah, they have a treatment plant there.
So
East
Carbon has treatment and a distribution system. So I believe Bert is certified in both of those.
Okay.
And we only require one person to be certified. Now we like everybody to be certified, but we require one person. So if this other person has failed it, sometimes people aren't good at taking tests. A lot of these guys have a background in,
I met a few.
Sure. Have a background in construction or whatever. And
What was the second? It's treatment and what?
Distribution.
Distribution, okay. Thank you.
Delivery of water.
Delivery. And so there's some challenging math problems in there. And so some guys struggle with the math part. I get it. It's not their forte, whatever. And
but,
so
we're trusting them to get it right.
If it takes several times for them to pass, that's not.
Now, we have noticed on the internet, there was a house with the name Kraus where water samples were taken in Colombia. I don't know if it's the same guy. There's several Krauses in town. Some of them were dead voters for a while, for 7 years, named Kraus, and others have moved away. But that the next question was a lot of people had that we've never been able to get any straight answers, or they have in any forum, was they understand from other towns they've lived in that the water inspectors would go around to different locations every single time. They would never take it from the same fire hydrant, creek, faucet, and they wouldn't let the faucet run for a while. They'd, take it right when it comes out of the faucet, and then they'd do another faucet, and they'd compare it after it runs a few seconds. Everything that's done is always a genuine random sample of the area. So what, to your knowledge, is the procedures in East Carbon City versus what we've seen on the internet that looks kind of routine?
So there's a number of samples that we require, and each one has a little bit different procedure. They have East Carbon should have a sampling plan, which says that and.
Have you ever seen it?
I don't have it. I haven't seen it. It's
okay.
But it should have. Okay, take samples from different areas at different times. So they're required to take bacteria samples once a month.
So it's bacteria?
Those come here and get tested at the lab here. And then...
we saw that lab when we came in, but it might be nice to take a look-see at it with the camera. Stretch your stuff. So we have a website called Waterlink. Maybe you've been there, where you can find a lot of information. Okay, if you could spell out the URL, that'd be great for people.
Let me find it. So there's a public side, and then there's an employee side. So that's I'm hedging a little bit on what's available for you guys, for the public, and what I can see, because I can see
a lot
more. So it is waterlink.utah.gov.
Okay.
So just waterlink.utah.gov.
Okay.
And that's for any public water system in the state. So you can then search for East Carbon.
Mm-hmm.
Oops, I have to spell it right though.
That's, yeah.
So East Carbon is number 04012. It's just our number system.
I've seen that before. Yeah.
So let's see here. So they test for bacteria monthly. They test for disinfection byproducts quarterly. Lead and copper every 3 years. Chlorine residual monthly. They should be doing it more than that, but that's what they turn in. And then
I could get a copy of that from the site, right?
Yeah, you can
Mhm.
go on here and
Oh,
see
no,
it.
I can go on my own computer and get it, and I'll make
Yeah.
I'll make a copy of it, and so I
This
can put it up.
This is the public. I can see more stuff, but this is the public.
This is like radiation compliance and so forth.
Yeah. So, like here's lead and copper, chlorine residual, and we can come back up here to the top, bacteria, disinfection byproducts.
This is terrific. I could put the link up and people can actually go to the site
Oh, sure.
themselves.
Find
Yeah.
out.
And then, so carbon or inorganics, metals, nitrate, pesticides, radionuclides, sulfate, sodium, total dissolved solids. Sometimes we get some acronyms. And organic, volatile organics. And so here's the testing
VOCs.
frequencies. Here's the last sample that they turned in, and here's when the next sample
What's
is due.
frequency 9 years?
So once every 9 years, we test for sulfate, sodium, and total
I see,
dissolved
okay.
solids. So they did that in 2018, so the next one is due anytime between now and 2028.
Okay, great.
All right. Now,
And then we've got total organic carbon and alkalinity. I mean, the list goes on and on.
this is all from East Carbon.
Yeah.
Grassy Trail Intake, East
So
Carbon
let's see
City,
here.
Sunnyside City Water System.
Trail intake, the source?
Yes.
Now, this number 91 well.
So I think they've got some wells that are old that they
The,
don't use anymore. It's
the
disconnected. You can see right
cogeneration plant was applying for a renewal of a water discharge, which means well, as far as I understand, that they may or may not have used for 5 years during the drought, but they noticed in our hearing, because we were challenging their conquest of 2 months' worth of spring water, as if it's running all year that way, and they had they wanted to renew that during that hearing that we had caused, and objecting to their snagging the creek. So the issue was, well, if you have a well and you haven't used it, and if they had or had not, we were trying to verify that.
So
Because we have had people, not we didn't do it, but somebody we knew went and tested for the water. They did 2 locations and they found a high level of manganese, and that was in the last 2 weeks.
So anyhow,
They only tested for manganese.
Well, I have some questions on the bacterial
okay, so
stuff.
hang on, let's we get sidetracked easily.
Sure,
So
please do.
We're talking
Let's
about
keep on it, yeah.
sampling. So here's the samples that we do.
Got it.
Here's the record. So that's what we've got. So
And you got a picture of that.
Yeah,
Okay,
from
great.
what I was
And
I'll be
scrolling.
going on there myself.
Yeah, go ahead. And so let me find my cursor. You can come back here. So
And it lists Cody
I just-
Valdez there as the
yeah.
guy.
So I typed in Utah WaterLink,
Mm-hmm.
and so the first choice is DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality WaterLink system. So you just come there, and then
That
you
was
can,
DQ.
yeah.
Department?
So Department of Environmental Quality. That's so. I work for Department of Environmental Quality. That includes the Division of Drinking Water, Water Quality, and such.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just come to this little box and type in East Carbon, and so you can click on that, and that's how you get this information.
Okay, great.
Okay. Alrighty. There were in looking at some of what we had surveyed on that, and weren't sure entirely that all of what we were looking at was just East Carbon, but now we see that it is. We have, at this hearing, and the one that was canceled because of a power outage previously on the 23rd,
The water rights one?
Yeah, there was two. One was about the alleged surface water for the dam in the mines, and then the other one was this Sunnyside Creek thing, and then they glommed on their well renewal to that, the cogen plant. So we interviewed some of the ranchers for hours, and they were explaining that a lot of cattle from like Springville are dropped over here on our BLM land by East Carbon City. And
That's their land.
yeah, and for instance, a fellow named Paul Martinez, who was at the hearing, he has command of 48,000 acres of BLM land, and it's got X number of cattle for 250 acres of grazing and so forth. But these, what they call guest cattle, are dropped there to fatten them up, and then they do a roundup, and we've seen one of the roundups, and they go find them. They don't have radio transmitters on these cattle or anything. But in times past, or people 8 years ago were fishing up at the lake routinely once a week, they'd be standing there and the cattle would come in up to their bellies and so forth into the reservoir. And any light you can shed on what I'm saying, because I'm telling you just what I know from other people who have lived here a long time, and this is secondhand info, that there's 3 property owners around the Water Soviet municipal water supply reservoir up there, and Westridge owns about 80% of the land around it, a couple other ones. And in times past, and this is at least 2 years plus, sometimes more recent, nobody tells anybody anything, so again, it's all rumor and guess, that there was an offer of fencing to fence in the thing by the landowners at their expense, and it was turned down twice by the city. Now, we don't know if there were any strings about that, or somebody said, well, if, ands, or buts, or, somebody's rights are, in conflict. There's no open forums that deal with this, so we don't know. So that was twice they did that. The problem is that from my own research, and you can tell me probably off the top of your head how many different numbers there are for E. coli that are spread by cattle. I looked up one, which was O157:E7, which is otherwise known as STEC. It's like a stigmatoxic E. coli, Echeveria coli. And it's called a super spreader kind of E. coli, according to the valuable source of Wikipedia. And a village in 1996 in Scotland, which is probably the same size as East Carbon City, 20 people died from it. Another 36 had their kidneys largely, messed up, and other organs, taxed, and their immune systems taxed. So anyway, we have heard recently that there is, quote unquote, an offshore money source that would offer a grant to build a fence around the city reservoir. Now, my own knowledge is that's probably a reinsurance company that would back up Aetna, United Health, and a bunch of life insurance companies, because they don't want to pay out a bunch of claims for a dead town. And so, as a preventive measure against having to make all those claims for years, they would then offer these grants to cities to protect their municipal water supplies. So again, that's conjecture, rumor, allegations. We're trying to find out facts. So what we're interested in from you is, if you don't know this off the top of your head, is how many different kinds of E. coli that cattle spread, including this rather dangerous one, the STEC, S-T-E-K stuff. And the people like us, we have our demographics in East Carbon skew elderly. Okay, so
a lot of elderly
people. Taxing organs and other things that are already going wrong with you or malfunctioning, it can kill you. So I don't know what the age group in Scotland was, but that doesn't sound too good to me. So we have this situation that has been chronic and ongoing for decades. Outside of the manganese element mineral stuff, and permanganate precipitates, or however, we have some questions on that by people.
So do you know about the steps?
The E. coli is of great concern because we understand now the city council has known about this for 3 years and has not said one word boo to anybody. And one of the recent candidates dealt with this. And so again, this is secondhand info. So what do you know about cattle E. coli up there and these cattle wading in and from everywhere?
So we test for the Division of Drinking Water. We require that all water systems test for what we call total coliforms.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but so these are all total coliforms. We call them TC, and that's the bacteria test that we do.
Okay.
It's a rather nifty test, in my opinion. We take a little bottle, looks like this, and every water system is required to do at least one of these a month.
Okay.
And so we test for total coliforms.
And
Coliforms.
that's tested in the reservoir, or?
No, from the drinking water
Okay,
supply.
in supply, okay.
After it's gone through treatment, some systems don't do treatment, that's fine. So total coliform. Coliforms, 99% of coliforms come from the insides of warm-blooded animals. So just pleasantly as possible, that's where they come from.
Gut
Cows,
stuff.
people,
Yeah.
other critters.
Yeah.
So we're very concerned about total coliforms. Now, total coliforms don't necessarily make you sick, but they're the easiest thing to measure for.
Something in the total does, okay.
So within total coliforms, you have a group of bacteria called E. coli.
Okay.
So you can have lots of total coliforms that don't make you sick.
So they're benign.
So they're benign, but we can test for total coliforms really easy.
Okay.
So E. coli's are in this umbrella of total coliforms.
Okay.
So they're a type of total coliform. So we don't test for E. coli right away, we test for total coliforms. If they come back total coliform positive, we have another way to test for E. coli, and it's a nifty little thing. So this sample comes into the lab, it's filled to the line with water, we add a little reagent to it, we incubate it for a day. If it turns yellow, that means that it's total coliform positive, and we start to do things if that happens. If it's yellow...
Do you use centrifuge tests or one-at-a-time tests?
No, just a little bottle. It's pretty simple. We like simple tests because they're hard to
Well,
mess up.
are you looking through the microscope
No.
or chemically?
You look at it, is it yellow or
And that's
not?
it, you can see
Uh-huh.
it. Yellow,
If
clear.
it's yellow, and this is the cool part, we stick it under a black light.
Okay.
Because they've engineered this reagent so it will react with total coliform. If it's yellow, then we have total coliform. If it has E. coli in it, it will glow under the black light.
Okay.
Which I think is really cool. So you can be total coliform positive and E. coli negative.
Okay.
That means it's safe, but we've got a problem. We need to fix it. If it's total coliform positive and E. coli positive, we've got problems. And
Okay, that's if it glows?
That's if it glows.
Under the black light, okay. And you do this twice a month in the city reservoir, or you're saying at the tap water?
In the drinking water supply.
In the drinking water
So
itself.
We don't test.
So you're assuming that the water treatment system is filtering out E. coli, is that correct?
So we don't filter it out necessarily.
Okay.
There's a whole treatment process to remove all kinds of things. We filter out sediment and chunks is what we like to call them. But through the process, we filter out, we screen out, and then what we can't screen out, we disinfect with chlorine. And so we remove or neutralize viruses and pathogens and bacteria and all those things. So the E. coli one is the one that we use as the indicator thing. So that's we don't test the lake because we assume that there's E. coli in the lake. We tell people not to drink lake water. We tell people not to drink river water. So Price and Prywide both take water from the Price River. Like, of course there's going to be
the cattle
in the
get
river.
this in troughs, puddles, and then they wander into the lake, and so it's like they can transmit it from someplace else in the valley or in the mountains, and then they wander in there. And this has been the concern about the fishermen, who were fishing then. And a mayor named Dale Andrews 8 years ago stopped the fishing, and the guy that was up there during the last week of fishing, he met two fish and game people. He says, well, we're closing it down, calls it trash up here. He goes, what trash? He says, I've been coming here for years. Do you see any trash? No. And he says, well, what are you saying? He says, well, he concluded they're making the mayor happy or something, But it's been shut down to fishing for years by humans, sitting there or throwing a sandwich, into the lake or whatever. But the main issue at this point is there are three landowners that surround the reservoir. Only one has 10 cattle, but all these other cattle, and Martinez's cattle, he's got like 15. He'd like to have a much bigger herd, but he's starved for water for the water rights on the west side of the city, and yet he's got the oldest water rights of anybody back to 1869. 1869. And so the purification of water alluvially through filling up the old mines that are 12 feet high, 30 feet wide, mine shaft tunnels. It's been dry for 5 years, and the recent rains have topped off the alluvial stuff, so it's moving at least as far into town as the Cogin plant goes underneath it and comes out on the highway to Columbia. Guys, the ranchers in the west, primarily, guys like Martinez, they're hoping that the alluvial river will just keep on going, and then the idea's delivery system would be you're digging wells and the earth has purified the water up to that point. And then whatever the cattle get, they get. His cattle, at least. There's another Big Springs ranch out there, a guy named Josh Rillings, and some others that are on the west side that are all starved for water. He's got the world's largest garden hose go to his troughs. And so the issue is partly these guest cattle brought over from other parts of Utah primarily to graze up there. And nobody knows what their bacterial transmission abilities are. It's just, as you say, it's assumed, okay, it's in the reservoir. Most of the townspeople have this other question that maybe as an engineer you can also answer. Outside of the issue of guest cattle and a fence, they're interested in who's, if it's the BLM or who's in charge of this externality factor of having the cattle graze up there, and all these guest cattle people that nobody knows quite who they are, except on Roundup sometimes. And the engineering aspect is with this has been another chronic problem for at least 2 decades, maybe more, from city council people who were on the council 20 years ago that we've interviewed. It's 80% silted up. Now, that level of silting up in a reservoir, presumably, and it's a guess, may cause other problems where algae or E. coli or whatever is sitting there is there. And the other issue is, I guess, Westfield, which owns or controls a lot of BLM land surrounding the city for miles and miles and miles. There's been little or no efforts to, deal with damming up flash floods on their property because they seemingly have tourist interests they want to do. There's people up in cabins, including President Bush coming up there. There's another guy working on a ski lift. And these are all wonderful things. It's their business. But when their rights collide with other people's, for instance, this is an engineering question. Last year, the excavation company that's local in town, called Young Excavation, scraped off all the vegetation next to one side of the reservoir, which was on a tilted hill. At that point, when the very first rain came, it washed a bunch of manganese-rich dirt into the city's reservoir. At that point, alarm bells went off. Within 48 hours, everybody was notified by a piece of paper or other means that don't drink the water. And you can bathe in it, but don't be guzzling it. So at this point, one of my acquaintances from BYU many years ago is a Dr. Sam Rushforth, who has a phycology lab, and he knows like every creek in Utah. He's been doing this for 50 years. So at this point, I was asked to go around to Walmart and Bishop's Storehouse for the LDS Church and Smith's, what water do you have and what do you have on order? Because we all got to buy it from Sunnyside, drive it over to Price to do this. And Las Vegas had a big fire and their reservoirs were full of ash, and so Costco and Walmart were sending immense amounts of water down there. The LDS Church sent all of the water bottles they had in Salt Lake at the Welfare Square off to Florida for a hurricane, and so for a while there was a real water shortage. Now, in a situation like this where there's an externality factor, that one person's action for a parking lot or whatever it was they had in mind to reduce it, they did not put an earthen berm there. There was no forethought. It just happened. There was whatever some people like to call planning. Some people are into permits, but just good logical thinking would say, well, you're going to silt the reservoir up some more. In this case, it happened to be with a poisonous element in this case. And you can explain to us in a bit how you drop manganese out of something precipitate or some other method. But a lot of people have some questions about this, that not one time in the last 9 or so months, and the first 6 where they were actually publishing monthly in the city newsletter what the various milligrams per liter were, and I did note that. I said, oh, that looks better than California's. The issue is there's been no assessment of liability. Who pays for all these elderly people's, scrimping by budgets, now having to drive into town or get water delivered? There was a couple of charity water deliveries from the mine workers and a Pepsi-Cola, and we helped distribute this not just for the LDS Church, but the Congregational Church. We went around helping people because little old ladies can't get out and lift great big, heavy pieces of 24 bottle packs. So this created a big disturbance, but not once have we heard from anybody on water quality or city council or somebody at the state or some independent lab, not about who is responsible, who's going to reward the people as the residents, not the city, not handing the city more money. They make that disappear. But to deal with, cut a check to everybody. There's 889 households plus a few ranchers in the area for this water. Can you address that whole scene and the manganese and how it can be stopped again from happening? Because it's raining again,
So manganese appears to be a seasonal issue in East Carbon. So about this time 2 years ago, we had a lot of complaints coming from East Carbon about the color of water.
Yeah, it smells, it foams.
It still does.
Checked the water. We took bacteria tests, came back clean. We looked at iron.
When you say we,
I went out there.
Okay.
The health department did an East Carbon, sent in samples.
So you individually took
Yes.
test samples.
Yes.
Where'd you take them from?
Various locations in town.
Okay, so
Houses.
Did you change the locations when you did it?
okay, that's great.
We got a candidate who bought a $10 manganese test, and at west end of Dragerton, where she lives, her name is Janice Hunt, it came up 0.2, which is above 0.1, which we were led to believe is the unsafe barrier. And yet the city meeting, which I think you were at, a couple weeks ago, they were claiming that all is well. So what do you know about that?
So let's go back. So 2 years ago we looked at it. We looked at iron, and that wasn't the case because iron has a tendency to color water. Anyhow, it stopped because it seems to be a seasonal thing, late summer, early fall sort of thing. So
But this would happen in the spring or early spring.
Last year, in whatever last year was, it happened again. We got concerned, and then we tested for manganese this time. Okay, manganese is really high. Okay, this is our problem. And so we were able to...
So how long do you think it went on before you caught the manganese? For us elders, inquiring minds want to know.
This last year, I don't know how long, but not too long, because we got excited about it. Let's jump on this and see if we can figure out what's going on. So we made some changes at the treatment plant. Notifications went out, like you said, papers. And generally, what we at the Division of Drinking Water do is we work with the water system and say, hey, you're required to do this. So they were required to send out notices to make
they
sure
did do that.
everybody's informed, whether that's, on the website, door to door, whatever.
Yeah, the result of that was just as a side note, when I was asked to meet with all these managers of these water supply things, and they were like, well, we just sent 3.5 tons of water bottles out to the East Bruin Elementary, East Carbon Bruin Elementary, and I said, well, bless your soul, and we'll have to order, but it may take us 2 weeks and so forth to get enough water bottles in here to accommodate your whole town coming over to Price, and at that point, a lot of the elders who are on limited Social Security are going, I can't afford this. And there was one guy, he had 12 used water dispensers, for water bottles that maybe were 2.5 gallons that some elders could lift. And so this was creating an economic dislocation. But I'll just back up one point. You mentioned when you noticed it, what was the prior time a manganese test was done? Do you have
I don't know.
recollection? Could you find out on that?
Not easily, because we generally don't test for manganese unless there's a problem. There may be like some sort of like one of these things where we do like inorganics and metals. So maybe once every 9 years. So, and that's depending on the time of year that test is taken. If it's done in January, well, there's not so much manganese in the water at that time. So sometimes, we require testing. Sometimes things fall through the cracks.
Yeah, they say that organs besides the kidneys that are primarily affected, there's other things like livers and whatnot, but a lot of other people who are elders, they want to know if hearts are affected by manganese content. And for our own schlock research that everybody's trying to do on the internet, getting something definitive is hard, and at what level? So that's a question they have, if you can find that out from some medical sources.
So we can inform people about the potential for manganese impact?
Not necessarily. So manganese isn't, so we have, and I'm going to the limits of my knowledge because I'm not
You also have all this private data you say you have.
Well, if you're doing that, is there somebody else that we could contact who might be able to provide us with the best information?
Yeah, I can give you some comments.
That'd be great.
The Division of Drinking Water. So we regulate lots of things like lead, for example. We have a good understanding of lead. So manganese, for a long time, was considered secondary, that it was benign, and so it just changes the color of your water. Well, nobody likes to drink colored water, so you probably want to remove
This is also what brought up a lot of the bacteria stuff and what's the quality of the water treatment plant up there,
So there's no official limit in Utah to say you're required to treat for manganese, because it's kind of an emerging contaminant. We're learning that it's causing problems.
Have you set up a protocol on an interval you're testing for it now?
So we're rolling those out. So it's an ongoing process. So like I said, lead is...
Till every time it rains.
Lead's fairly well understood. We don't want any lead in our water. Manganese, okay, we're learning about it. We're zeroing in, and just like the government, we move slower than everybody wants us to. So that's kind of where we're at with.
Well, this brings up another question. Competitive water, there's 4 water functions. There's gathering it, storing it, there's delivery, there's the treatment, and then there's the sewage, so forth. And there are many towns in Utah, much less the West and deserts, that have different competitive companies doing this, whereas we have this municipal situation here where the old steel companies that ran the coal mines had water rights and they gave them to the city. And so we have essentially a government water system. So we have too slow and too slow combined, as opposed to saying we can deliver your water better, by one company over another, or we have non-toxic pipes and you don't, So there's these different kinds of free market methods and water shares, and the people who are either landowners and are residents, and somebody wants to grow cattle or indoor greenhouses, they would buy more water shares to accommodate their use of it, as opposed to averaging it out like everybody does in East Carbon, who uses very little water, to people who use a lot, and everybody's counting pennies who is on the lower end. So then that comes into like, well, what money is there and who's in charge of it by the city, the county, the state, or private labs that are maybe contracted to keep track of this stuff at an interval for a bunch of senior types that are wanting to know, can I drink this stuff? And for each time it rains, everybody's going, I don't know.
So kind of going back to it, and it's not on here because I don't think this database is necessarily set up for manganese. But since our event last year,
hire a programmer.
It's being overhauled kind of as we speak. But manganese is kind of a special situation, like I said. So since our event last year, we required East Carbon to get a manganese meter. So they measure the manganese in the water every day.
Where is this meter?
At the water treatment plant.
Okay.
And so they make adjustments. So
that's going out, not in, I assume.
As it's going out.
Okay.
Yes. And so we have a water treatment plant specialist up in Salt Lake, and she came down and has visited East Carbon many times to help fine-tune the water treatment plant to remove manganese. And moving forward, there's a new treatment plant being constructed. Hopefully it'll be online by the end of the year.
That brings another question, but go ahead.
We'll get there. So anyhow, so that treatment plant will be able to remove manganese as well. So in any case, they're measuring manganese every day, and the way that we've been treating manganese is to put in chlorine at the beginning of the treatment plant that oxidizes, binds with the manganese, and that's able to be
what's the permanganate? Does that precipitate it out?
Potassium permanganate.
Potassium, that's correct. Potassium permanganate. Do you add the potassium and then it creates the oxygen and the manganese glomming onto it? What happens? Describe this. People want to know.
Chemistry that I don't completely understand.
Okay.
Our treatment plant. So
they have settling tanks. Is that part of it?
Yes. So it's in a process where we add some flocculation, gather the chemicals or the things together, they bind up, and then they settle out.
Okay.
Out.
Okay.
That's basically the quick version of how water treatment plants work. One of the chemicals that is frequently used is potassium permanganate, which adds manganese.
Now, do they add the potassium and it turns into permanganate, or
no? You add potassium
permanganate and then it gloms on more manganese to that. Is that the idea?
Yes, and our treatment plant specialist, I specifically asked her, I'm like, so we use manganese to treat for manganese, and she said yes. So it's like fighting fire with fire.
I got it. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand how that works. So if you have some presentation sometime you can do on that, everybody's anxiety levels would probably go down.
In any case, we have some tools at the treatment plant. They measure every day. If the manganese levels go up because of rainstorms or whatever, somebody does some construction, they can adjust the treatment plant and bring that level back.
Where is the treatment plant?
It's up the canyon.
Yeah, it's up the canyon there.
It's not too far below the dam.
Yeah, Cindy and I have been up there to check it out. Okay, so your confidence level in potassium permanganate is the method to deal with this. Is that correct?
That and the pre-chlorination. So we take the chlorine and put it at the beginning of the treatment process. Not all of it, some of it, and that's really done wonders.
And you're saying the chlorine also deals with the manganese in some way?
Yes.
Okay.
And chlorine is often used to precipitate out things like iron, arsenic, and manganese.
Yeah,
So
it makes different salts.
instead of putting
Okay.
in 100% of the chlorine at the end of the treatment, which is what most systems do, they put some at the beginning and then most of it at the end. So
Okay.
it's worked really well.
Okay. Now, recently when I went up there, I've made 3 trips up in the last couple months. It looks like they got the footings in and so forth. Then we understand there's some problem with the footings and so forth. So like, okay, so this is going to be a delay maybe in the next spring. But we interviewed a couple of retired contractors in the town, and they were scratching their heads. Why would you put a treatment plant 3 miles up the canyon that has ice and snow when there's still an elevated area for the treatment plant close into the city, so it would still have some elevation and water pressure for Sunnyside, Edgerton, Columbia, and not risk the delivery pipes having a heavy truck go over them? They got cement trucks, they got all kinds of traffic on that road trying to build, whatever they're trying to do up there, tourist stuff. And if the truck was slightly off the road and the line is underneath the road, which it looks like at times past it has been, or it's beside the road or whatever, that it could easily get cracked, crushed. And so the pure water that's coming from the treatment plant now is contaminated en route, and nobody might catch that for some time until they get sick or whatever. And this questioning where we have a closed city and there's no feedback system, so anybody that knows anything could even ask an intelligent question, or if they do, they get arrested for talking too loud in the lousy acoustics in the city council, and they're given a ticket. So they're very reluctant, as retirees counting their pennies. I can't do with $100 just to speak my mind. And the problem with this is that here's a couple of contractors say, this is nuts. Why is this thing up there instead of down here? Yeah, you have your reservoir up there, run the pipes down that, could have problems, maybe so. But in the treatment plant, they'd be taken care of very close to the town.
What would you just think of that as an alternative?
So as an engineer, what's your immediate reaction to these 2 contractors saying, what's going on here?
So we generally like our treatment plants up higher, and that does 2 things for us. One is that we have water pressure.
Of course.
And so everybody likes to have pressure in their house, to have a nice shower and fill up their cups of water and things like that. Water pressure does a lot of things. That's, the big benefit is that everybody has good service pressure at their homes.
Flushes stuff through, yeah.
But it also provides a layer of protection for the pipes. So if there's a break, water goes out instead of in. And so that's the main thing. If you're up in the canyon, you have lots of pressure to deal with.
The Cogen plant has a big water ball next to it. Is that connected to the cities at all? A lot of people don't know. They've lived there for years.
The bubble tank that's round.
Yeah, looks like it has some insulation on the outside ripped off.
That's a East Carbon city water tank.
Okay, so that provides
it. That this year.
Oh, okay. So that provides additional water pressure.
No. So the tanks do not. I think I have a picture of it right there.
I've seen that.
Yeah, it's by the.
That's in the good
fields.
side. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the one with the world's largest pitcher's mound on it. Yeah.
This is very unusual, like in the state. So I took a picture of it because I like it.
I can imagine. It's fascinating because you wonder what it is. You don't know.
Yeah, it's a water tank. The water doesn't go all the way to the top. I don't know what level it goes to, but in any case, water tanks do a couple things for us.
Can you send me a copy of the picture? That'd be great to have.
Sure, they maintain the pressure, and that comes from the elevation from the water treatment plant. But they also provide storage so that the water treatment plant isn't running all the time. So we call that equalization storage. It provides fire protection storage, so if there's a fire, whatever.
Especially by the coal plant.
So
okay.
we really like pressure in our systems.
Uh-huh.
So that's...
How much does that hold?
I don't know. A lot.
It's not like a water tower because it's already on an elevated hill.
Well, so
That's the idea, I guess?
In Utah, we're lucky that we have mountains and hills, and so we can get our pressure naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So the water pipe that runs down from the water treatment plant in it of itself, because there's so much water for 3 miles in that pipe, that provides pressure, gravity itself.
Elevation provides pressure. So
Okay.
in other areas of the country and even other water systems that don't have a canyon that you can put something up there, they have to get their pressure by pumps. And you pump the water up into a water tank. That costs lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you can get that gravity elevation for free, that's a good thing.
Okay.
There is some small risk of a truck crashing and breaking the pipe.
Or just rolling on crunch.
That risk is very small compared to other things.
What kind of pipes do you know that they're going to be running for 3 miles? Metal, PVC,
Anything
what?
put in nowadays is going to be plastic.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
And in cold weather in a truck, okay, that's what these contractors are
Sure.
questioning the logic of, is illogic.
We bury the pipes. We require them to be buried below the frost level.
Yeah,
so
geothermal
they don't
stuff, yeah.
freeze. And we have
That's what, 8 feet deep?
4 feet deep.
What kind of plastics do you use?
PVC, HDPE, but mostly
Yeah.
PVC.
I was talking to a geothermal guy. He was saying in Utah, 8 feet down is the best for geothermal, 55 degrees.
Sure.
So you take the pipe and you simply dig a trench and you lay it in? Is that how you do it?
And so some areas like Park City might go deeper. Some of the higher elevations, but generally speaking, it's 4 feet deep.
The existing pipes come out of the ground and kind of cross a little minor ravine, and then they
How
go
long
back
does it
underground again.
PVC pipe lasts as long as we know, indefinitely. So it's a relatively new product.
Yeah, this is the non-toxic PVC. It's color-coded blue.
Yes.
Well, they didn't used to.
So
I know that, but they would be using it for water.
Well, with these guys, I never know.
yeah. In any case, the other reason we like it up away from the city is that, again, going back to how we treat water with the chlorine, you can't just dump some chlorine in there and then start serving it to customers. It needs to have some time to cook or to bake to make sure that we have contact
Diffuse
with
and all
of
that,
the-
yeah.
anything else that's left over.
Okay.
So we call that contact time.
How long has it been in use then?
The treatment plant?
No, the piping, the PVC.
I don't know.
I've only seen the blue in the last decade, but they used to have white, and that was sort of the
Yes.
color for
For a long
non-toxic.
time. Well, and
The reason I'm asking this, I'm interested in, always more sustainable products. So I just want to be able to compare it to other things I've seen.
Yeah, I noticed Wellington's digging up all their stuff, and it's all blue.
yes,
Yeah,
well, they're doing
so-
a sewer project too. So now it's typically blue for water, green for sewer. That's not required. It can be white pipe, whatever. But it's nice, easy.
Color code,
Like,
yeah.
oh, blue water.
I have a question for you. I've seen this similar kind of city politics before. I was in a place called Cuyama, California. It's kind of halfway between Taft and the seacoast, big long highway, and they grow miles and miles of carrots there. Okay.
Yes, I was going to tell you, be careful of the ones that grow there because they have arsenic in them.
Yeah, they're squirting
And they're not taking it out.
arsenic-laden water on the carrots. The town's water tank, which is elevated up, 100 feet in the air, became an issue when I was told when I moved there, you cannot bathe in it, much less drink it. Okay, like, oh, well, that's interesting, if you do, to make it really quick, because the arsenic will build up and get you. Now, this is really great, but they couldn't get anybody to teach there, so they actually offered me a house to teach there as a way to compensate, and then saying I can't use any of the plumbing. I thought that was interesting. So the students in the area, they'd proposed a desert to the sea race with, a timed race on this new highway, and the city just shut this down really hard because we'd have to import grundles of water bottles in for a large crowd, and how are we going to do that? And the sponsors, would have to bear this cost and so forth. And so it was no go, and it would draw attention to the fact that the carrot people, Bolt House was one company among others, was doing this, and without, call it psychopathic bean counters, whatever you want to call it. They were doing it without any conscience, and so to this day, 20 years later, I get very suspicious on carrots from there.
Sure.
And so, like, it's all as well, don't worry about it, I like, okay, use a sponge, what do you want me to do here? Buy bottled water and I clean myself this way. What is it you're telling me,
Mm-hmm.
And this is a town of 1,000 people.
You didn't take the job.
Okay.
Well, I did for about a semester.
And you couldn't worry him too much.
But they had a gigantic fire in the area, and my classroom wound up at headquarters for 14 agencies with the whole West fighting this giant thing. But in the process, the kids asked good questions. And so they didn't care. They had no stake in the fact whether they didn't own Bolt House stock, And the city fathers and the principal, who were all trying to keep this quiet, weren't succeeding with the kids. Kids have a great BS meter. And so I've seen this all as well stuff before. And so my credibility with city councils on such are low. And when we challenge something like, well, okay, it's good to have a little chlorine gas away from the town. Well, it could be a half mile away up the canyon instead of 3 miles. And, these kind of, engineering questions are there, and it's still elevated. It's above the town, just like that tank is there.
A report from the city that has the actual information, and not just a statement, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
That's
all we get.
Kind of reassurance, and that's what we'd like
Oh,
to give
it's
people.
complicated. This is the mayor's favorite, phrase, like percentages are complicated. Come on, they own how many water rights, what percent, how much pollution is there, what percent, and so forth.
Yeah, because it gets to the water rights too.
So outside of the insurance companies and the medical bills and the, death claims that, I've already speculated that the grant they're trying to get is from some reinsurance company like Swiss Reinsurance or Munich Reinsurance if they're offshore. America's largest reinsurance company, RGA, is number 7 in the world. So it makes sense that there's other people interested in this as a routine precaution. If they find too many French people drinking wine and crashing into telephone poles, they'll actually do an advertising campaign. French people don't drink so much wine, kind of goes against the stereotype. But that's the kind of thing that insurance companies who do risk analysis deal with. Now, there's a couple of other water quality issues besides that, but I'd really appreciate it if you'd look into the logic of where this plant ought to be, because nobody's questioned this. And, I want to finish this, says the guy who on the city council is assigned by the mayor, a guy named
And
Chuck
it's up there
Abeta,
pretty
to do it.
high. I mean, they might be able to bring it down somewhat lower and still have the water pressure they need.
Yeah. And the idea is that they also are trying to fill the reservoir from this $9.7 million abandoned mine, shall we call it a grant, that the ranchers and many of the residents are PO'd about, because you can only either deliver water by pipelines or you can deliver it underground and dig wells. I mean, if you try to do both systems at the same time, it doesn't work very well. Nobody gets nothing. And there's not enough. And with drought situations going on, this is anticipated. There'll probably be another drought. I've lived in Utah long enough that I remember the giant floods when El Nino and El Nina combined, and the city creek in Salt Lake was going to burst, and so they were asked the church, and the church had people build sandbags on both sides in North Temple, and then State and went down. He's a little younger than I am, but it was astonishing. In 24 hours, here was a 5-6 foot high wall of sandbags, and then they let the water out and ran right through the downtown of Salt Lake to the other side.
The film was amazing. Yeah. I saw the film.
Check it out on. They have some old footage, but
I'm afraid I gotta go. I have another another thing. Can
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Can we
Well, I have.
continue this another
Yes,
day?
yeah. Would be your next availability? We have some
so-
interesting questions about scrubbers and water
And we're going to go get
water
online
cooling
and do some
towers
research too.
with.
So we'll have better questions now.
Next week, I'm fairly open.
Okay,
Monday of next week.
sounds good.
That could work for us, sure.
Okay,
What time?
your option. We're busy but fluid.
Let's see.